It got scary because there was Wi-Fi on the plane, so people found the text message on the plane. Yeah. So we hadn't been told, but we knew what was going on.
The pilot came on and said, I've never had this happen before, but I was just told just now that and he said there was a credible threat to this plane, because then everybody paid attention.
The comments of some air travelers, because over the weekend, the evacuation of count them, 5 domestic flights because of security threats made via the social media site Twitter.
I just keep thinking about those passengers and what that must have been like. As many as 16 threats have been made in 4 days. One claimed that there was a bomb on board an American flight to Chicago. Another grounded a JetBlue plane in Boston. Thankfully, no bombs were found, but very scary for those people.
And mind games at work. And so to join us with more on this story, we welcome in Dr. Denee Jordan. She's a clinical psychologist and marriage and family therapist, founder of Already Well, and mental health services director for the Exceptional Children's Foundation. And with that intro, Denee, thank you for your time. Welcome to America's Forum. So the good news is no bombs found, but psychologically, what does this do to the people who were flying that plane, to the people who were passengers? Is this the new realm of psychological terror?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's completely understandable that people on that plane would be terrified. And I think that the essential power of terrorism or even terrorist threats is the fact that they use fear. And it isn't so much obviously what happens, it's what might happen. That's how the terrorists actually get their power.
In your 26 years of practice, how powerful is fear?
Well, actually, it's surprising. Through my career, it has been amazing how resilient people actually are. And research also proves out that even in the worst sorts of traumas, in the worst sorts of catastrophes, human beings are amazingly resilient. We do bounce back pretty easily.
Mindful of that, I think back to 9/11, Doctor, where there was some initial panic, and then people said, we're not going to let the specter of terrorism dominate our lives. We're not going to live in fear. And then that was followed, I don't want to say by collective amnesia, but we've scaled back concerns about terror, it seems, at least in terms of public policy. Economically, for the airline industry, Denee, could this tactic have a real economic implication short term?
I can't really speak to the airline business, but I will say that certainly it can have an impact in the short term. But as you just said, we are amazingly resilient. And whether it's resiliency or whether it's us just going into denial, either way we get on our feet pretty well and just continue on with life. So I wouldn't say that I think this will have a long-term effect.
So we were just talking earlier about how basically psychological warfare and how difficult it can be to fight ideology. What would you recommend for people who may be fearful about coming against Islamic extremists who are in fact Muslim? What advice would you give those people?
Well, I think it's important also to balance our fear and anxiety with real fact. I think that, for example, you mentioned a number of planes being downed or there being threats. There are approximately 100,000 flights in the air every day in the United States. So I think balancing our fear with the realistic facts of our environment is really important. And that's very difficult to do in our media-saturated environment because we hear about all sensational behavior over and over again. And it's frequently not balanced out with the reality of the situation. We actually have a better chance of dying on a bicycle than we do in the air.
And as you offer those facts to counter the fear, I've always wanted to say this to a therapist. Time's up. Oh, but just for right now, Dr. Denee Jordan, stay with us. We go to a break, then we come back to talk more about what we can do to overcome our fear of flying, both in general and now in the wake of these kind of toxic tweets. Stay with us. There is more ahead here on America's Forum right after this. Let's continue our conversation about flying. Even in tranquil times, some of us have a fear of it.
Yeah, and you actually had battled that a little bit yourself, right? I would never guess that.
For a kid who once wanted to be an astronaut, over the years I became a white knuckle flyer for a time. And it passed on, and then getting elected to Congress and commuting back and forth to
get
Washington.
Over that.
Yeah, you have to get over it. Let's talk more about flying as we continue now with clinical psychologist Dr. Denee Jordan. Denee, even in the best of times, there are people who are just flat out afraid.
Right.
What is the best advice you have to calm fear of flying?
Well, I think, first of all, that everybody has a little bit of a fear of flying. I mean, all of us know that when we're up in the sky, if something happens, we don't have much that we can do about it. And when we lose control of our environment, we can get scared. I think that the thing to remember is there are lots of things in life we don't have control over. And sometimes we just have to surrender to that because worrying, being afraid, if you think about it, is an incredible waste of energy. There's nothing we can do to keep ourselves safe in the air other than following the general recommendations.
But let's say you are a white knuckle flyer, or used to be, or let's just say all of a sudden you start to get that panic attack when you hear someone announce what could be a threat. How do you tell that person to cope?
I think that breathing really helps. Breathing deeply, thinking intelligently. To be honest with you, I think if I was in a plane and I heard that there was a threat, I'm going to be scared. I think tempering our panic is important so that we can behave in a rational way. The more scared we get, the more irrational we are. And staying rational, certainly in a situation like that, is very important.
Denee, right after I was elected to Congress, they had us all come back to Washington. And my wife, Mary, and I were on a flight from Phoenix. We stopped in Columbus, Ohio, then loaded up the plane to go on to Washington. About 20 minutes out of Columbus, there was this terrific whoom. And the pilot came on in kind of that test pilot jargon saying, "Folks, that wasn't supposed to happen, but it appears we've been struck by lightning. Now we can go back to Columbus or go on to Washington. Let's go on to Washington. It appears everything is all right." And I got to tell you, Denee, I noticed two things. Number one, everybody got quiet. And number two, it just seemed like the power of prayer rose exponentially.
Were you saying that serenity prayer like she was talking about?
Yeah, that, and also everybody's palms. They could sell antiperspirant for your palms. We had some sweaty palms. Good news is we got there fine, but it was an interesting situation to be in. That notion of silence, is that uniform, or do some people panic in these situations?
Well, I think that silence, first of all, people are waiting. They're waiting to see what's happening. I like that you said there was some unity, because frequently in negative situations, if you're looking for the positive, there's a real unification of people that are going through things together. I think that having sweaty palms and being nervous is completely realistic. Being panicked, on the other hand, excuse me, is not functional, nor is it beneficial. So being able to monitor our nervousness, monitor our fear is really important. And I think we can practice that in daily life. We don't have to wait till we get up in an airplane to do that. Usually people that are easily panicked are nervous most of the time anyway. And it's something that needs to be dealt with more on a daily basis.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Denee, but I believe asking Americans what their greatest fear is, it's not fear of flying, it's fear of public speaking. Obviously, Dr. Denee Jordan, you've conquered that fear, and we don't share it right here. We want to thank you for your time, appreciate your insights into flying, both with the specter of tweeted threats and just flying in general.
We're going to breathe now.
Certainly news you can use. So that tale absolute truth from my
Well, you've
my
come a
first
long
trip.
way. You're doing great.
We once, the odds of getting struck by lightning, we got that done. I talked to the pilot in later years. He said, we were on the phone. We were hooked up with the makers of the plane. We were going through the diagnostics. Everything was okay, but we were a little busy in the cockpit. There are a lot of folks busy here telling us time's about up. When I come back, the way I see it. Stay with us.